All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully, your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. Dan, one of your hosts here, and alongside me, Sam, to join us once again because Chelsea are back, at least the men's team. The international break for the men is over at this point, and they are returning to duty to take on a very tough stretch of games that will really put Maresca and his men to the test to see if what we've seen so far is a little bit of a mirage or potentially proof that this team has the ability to go deep into the season in that top four, maybe advancing in the top three, and potentially even challenging the top of the table team that will be taking on Liverpool. It never feels good to say that, Sam. I don't think it ever feels good to say another team beyond Chelsea is currently atop the table. So we will suffer through that within this one here. But how are you feeling heading back into the Chelsea men's team being back, heading back into another match preview, heading into this really, I think, important match for Enzo Maresca to stamp his authority with this Chelsea side and in the Premier League to start this really rough run of fixtures?
Definitely. I think it's the first time I've been disappointed for the international break to happen because in the past couple of seasons, I'm like, okay, I needed that breather to get my senses together, basically watch our games back and figure out where we are. But this time I was like, okay, we've built great momentum. 7 games unbeaten is an absolutely fantastic run. Credit to Maresca and all the players for doing so. But at this point, I like you mentioned, I think this is the definitive fixture. Like this one probably tells us where we are. And I was listening again to the Matt Law podcast that we did a couple of days, slightly like a week and a half ago. And he was quite generous with his assessment, saying that it might not be the end of the world if you lose against Liverpool, because obviously the side has been built over longer and has proven title credentials. So the next 3-4 games is not indicative of where we are because our objectives will still be top four and maximum you get your fourth spot, get into the Champions League, and next season is when you want to challenge for the title. But I do think there's a lot at stake. I would say that this probably is a good barometer in terms of if we can compete with the best, how we compete for the best. And I also think this is the first time we see how Maresca sets up against the big side? Like, does he go on the front foot or does he go to what the wily Italian managers do, where you analyze the opposition's strengths and then you tweak it to manipulate it and basically deceive them in some way? So I'm very intrigued. I think tactically it's going to be a great battle. So I've got my notepad out and hopefully I'll have some good things to talk about.
Well, we're going to get into all of the specifics. If you haven't joined us for a match preview before, or if you have, just a reminder, we go all into what the current style of play is for a side, breaking down in particular with a new manager change, what we can expect from the side, what those recent fixtures have looked like, where they are strong on the pitch, but then also to sprinkle a little bit of hope and optimism in there, tell you about the weaknesses they have as well. And then we'll get into a conversation around what Maresca has to solve. What are the issues and big concerns that he'll have? Are they related to personnel availability or maybe in particular matchups in this match? And then, Sam asked me a couple random questions to keep me on my toes to start to preview what we think might happen, knowing all of that information. So we'll get into all that in just a second. But before we do, as always, thank you to everybody who supports the podcast. We always appreciate a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you have the time. It takes less than 30 seconds, so that would be wonderful. You also can subscribe over on YouTube, hit the bell icon to get notified, like and comment, and as always on the preview videos, you got to say thanks to Sam because he was watching the tape back for us in this one. You also can sign up for our free weekly newsletter, the London is Blue Dispatch, and you can join into the conversation in Discord in a paid or free capacity. But that's all the admin out of the way. We are going to get into talking about Liverpool, currently atop the table in the Premier League, which is another just vomit in throat type of situation here. Plus 11 on the goal difference at the moment, 18 total points, 1 point ahead of City, 1 point ahead of Arsenal atop the table, and they are 4 points ahead of Chelsea at this moment. So a proper top four battle between these two teams, which, in recent history, Sam, like we have seen some very interesting results against Liverpool. A lot of draws in cup competitions that have advanced to extra time or to penalties. We've seen, and I don't know, is your what's your vibe on like maybe not before we get into all the specifics about Slot and his team here, but did you just have a read on how you think Liverpool fans are potentially feeling about this start of the season? Maybe a little shocked, a little surprised, or feeling like there's been enough continuity that actually the manager became a little bit of an interchangeable component for them.
Well, I'm surprised personally because I was expecting Slot to have a hard time. And I'm just looking at the basics of it, the turbulence that has been there around the club. Obviously, their entire recruitment setup has gone, an overhaul. Then the manager being changed was the big one for me. And I think a lot of their top stars, like if you look at Van Dijk, if you look at Salah, Allison, all of them are now heading into the twilight of their careers. Salah is 32, soon to be 33, and that's when the decline sets in. So there is again a very steep path for them up ahead, and I thought that might be a little too much for Slot to handle. But we're still only 7 games in, and they've made a very promising start. But as we know, that counts for very little. Things can go one notch up or four notches down. So I'm at this point quite surprised, and I'm quite buoyed, I would say, in terms of like watching their performances, saying that it's a good side, but just like us, they're overperforming on certain metrics. So I do feel like it will come back to the mean somewhere. But I would probably say I'm quite optimistic. I don't feel like it's an uh, Sisyphus like task where you might end up just giving your all and nothing's going to give. I think there's a chance that we sneak away with something. Could be 1 point, could be all three, but I don't feel down in the dumps. I don't feel like overawed by the opposition. Let's just put it at that. But I would love to know what you're feeling, Dan. Like, is it the same sentiment, or are you little hesitant because obviously top of the table, playing really good football, also I think 5 wins in a row, right? So um, not ideal circumstances to face them.
Not ideal circumstances. I mean, I guess when you look at where they have been challenged, I mean, they beat Wolves 2-1. They did smash West Ham 5-1 in that game. They beat Bournemouth 3-0. Their Champions League games have been, generally very good. And then, they were able to beat Palace in their last fixture 1-0. So like I don't know what to take on that because I think also our results have been a little whack a mole here too occasionally. And so I feel like they have just benefited from, effectively one or two more fixtures of a better or cleaner result. I mean, they lost against Forest, right? We drew against Forest. So, like, just interesting, like, sliding glass door moments between the two teams. I think in all intents and purposes, like this Chelsea team actually could be, if the expected goals for and expected goals allowed actually counted is reality, Chelsea would be second in the table in terms of total points. So I think that there's maybe these teams are closer than we think, at least on the some of the metric elements. But whether that comes true in the actual football in the day, I think is going to become the big question, particularly as they do have a couple of big absences. I mean, Allison being absent for out of injury is going to be a big kind of hit for them. But we also, on the flip side, we lost Kukurea and Wes to red card accumulation, match suspension, or yellow card, yellow card. Let me clap back in. And we lost, two critical players in our defense in Marco Correa and Wes Fafana to yellow card accumulation, both of them picking up their fifth yellow card of the season right before the international break. So not available for us. So I mean, both managers are going to have their not their preferred starters in all of their positions. I think, which does also add a little bit of additional chaos to what this match could provide.
I think I'm the only person, like not I'm the only person, probably the only fan base that would, actually want Allison in goal because every time Kelleher comes up, he turns into like Oliver Kahn against us, and generally nothing goes in. He was there for that bizarre penalty shootout that we lost. He was again there for every cup fixture, and he ended up thwarting us in, moments where I thought like Allison wouldn't do things. So I'm a little bummed because of that, but like you mentioned, maybe there are some encouraging absences up and down for them. And obviously, they're looking at us saying, no left back for you. There's obviously a first choice right centre back missing. So, what's going to be the equation there? But yeah, I think it's definitely like it leaves enough uncertainty for either side to maybe exploit it to a degree where you run out with a freak result. And that's what I feel. Like I don't want somebody coming up against whoever is at left back, and then Salah is obviously going to be there, so that ends up being like a weak point for us. And we are able to again manipulate their numbers where it looks a little too good to be true. I'm looking at the defensive record, and they've only conceded 2 in 7 games, which is astonishing, Dan. Like, it doesn't sound right at all. I think they should have definitely conceded a lot more, at least like maybe a couple more to be on par with the others. I think Arsenal are 4 away at 6. But who knows? It sort of like is set up well for quite an uncertain, freakish result. But like you said, maybe both sides are closer than they appear, and it's too far too early to tell at this point, or this juncture in the season, whether one's better than the other, or if Liverpool are going to be champions per se. So yeah, I think that uncertainty is giving me a little bit of hope, and I'm going to stick to it for dear life.
Well, we will get into now all the specifics around their style of play right after this first ad break. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Okay, Sam. So walk us through what we should expect from this Liverpool side if we have not been watching with our blue tinted glasses over the start of the Premier League campaign. Give us the 4-1 on the new look Liverpool.
Yeah, certainly. I think, like I mentioned, the first context would be to say that losing Klopp was a huge blow, and especially somebody who's essentially built a dynasty there in terms of his players, in terms of a playing style, and resonated well with Anfield. There was always going to be a big hole and big shoes to fill. And initially, what's happened is Arne Slot has come in, and he's basically stuck to the same principles. It's not chopping and changing and saying this is going to be my style of play. He's also openly sort of given credit to Klopp, saying that I didn't have to, inculcate high pressing or tell them how to win the ball and when to press, when not to press, because that just naturally came to the set of players that they have. They're very athletic, very quick, very physical. So in a way, it sort of helped him implement his style of play, which again is a hat tip to Michael Edwards and the recruitment, which basically picked out a manager that was great for his squad. But what I would say is high pressing, high intensity is a great starting point for Slot. It's something that he wants from his players. He wants to win the ball very, very close to the opponent's goal, and then from there he wants to explode and basically take it away. If you notice, there's like not a essential playmaker in the front four, front five. Mohamed Salah is very good, but he's not. I wouldn't say he's a playmaker. He's more like a devastating wide forward. But their playmaker is essentially like maybe Alexander Arnold, who's a bit further back, and they don't have a Cole Palmer or they don't have a Martin Odegaard who's basically pulling those strings. So they need to be aggressive. They need to win the ball in those areas to cause a lot of damage. The main change, I think, tactically is that Jurgen Klopp used to prefer a 4-3-3, and Slot has sort of gone from that single pivot in a 4-3-3 to a double pivot with a 4-2-3-1. And he's essentially tried to make it work, give it a lot more balance. Last season, I thought Liverpool had one pretty good weakness, which was the defensive midfielder. Endo was far too slow. And although combative and very industrious, like in defensive transitions, teams were eating him up for good. So they've gotten away with that, done away with that entire position and said, okay, we'll give it a little more balance and sort of like make it steadier there. They still haven't found an heir to Fabinho in that role and to basically make it as watertight as possible, but they're trying their best. That PPDA, like I said, is the fourth best in the league. So it's at around 9, which is quite intense. So they press with a lot of intensity. The best, I think, are Spurs and Brighton with around 7, so not too far off from that mark. The one thing that has changed from the Klopp era is, I think, the build-up. There's a lot more emphasis here, Dan, on building up from the back, basically using passes into midfield. And it's a very fluid setup. Like I look at their build up principles and it's not coherent. Like I can't put down a number saying, oh, it's 3-2 or it's going to be 4-1 or something like that. It switches up very, very quickly. And the players have done really well to sort of acclimatize to it. So a lot of the times you'll see, for example, you know, the double pivot with a 3-2, but sometimes you'll see one of the pivots basically move forward and there'll be a lone pivot there. Either McAllister is going to be there or Gravenberch is going to be there. And then Trent Alexander-Arnold, for example, will invert from right back into midfield. So suddenly it becomes a completely different shape. But the one thing that stands out is the entire team looks to create some kind of a gap in the first phase. So it can be at centre back, it can be at left back, it can be in the pivot, and one of the players from the front line, from right back, from left back, even from centre back, you'll often see a gap open up. But instead of, say, Dominic Szoboszlai dropping from number 10, it'll be, Konate moving and basically carrying the ball forward. So it's a bit unpredictable. It's also very high risk, but it's quite interesting to see. I think he's done that very well in terms of teams don't know how to press them. I think that's a great addition that they've done, and so far seems to be working very well for them.
And then, so as we look at just maybe how they're operating within certain phases of the game, in terms of maybe when they are trying to kind of break through the press and play centrally, or maybe what they're doing in and out of position, in and out of possession. What are some of the things that you're seeing about how they play through those different phases now, as we get a little bit deeper into how all of that tends to take place when we're in actual match settings?
Yeah, I would say it's quite similar to what Brighton do. I think that's what's been surprising to see. Like, I look at their style of play, and it's very, not very, but it's quite similar to what De Zerbi wants to do when he's, putting it all together. He's trying to bait the press slot. He's trying to force people's midfields forward from closer to their defensive line to press to show them that you can win the ball. And there's a conscious effort to try and play through the center. And I think that's also, again, back down to the shape, because you've gone from Endo, who's basically a Bundesliga defensive midfielder, to Alexis McAllister, who's played that role for Graham Potter when he was at Brighton, and also Grant Gravenberch, who's an exceptionally press resistant midfielder. He's also great at carrying. He's got decent passing, not as good as McAllister, but both of them can basically progress under pressure. So they've got some great options there. And the intent is to try and show them that, you need to press us, you need to try and win the ball. So they will create deceptions. So most of the build-up sort of principles tell you should always have an extra man. And Maresca tries to do it by adding the goalkeeper, and some other teams will try to do it in a different way. But Slot tends to keep it at numerical parity, so it'll be a 4 versus 4, for example, in the build up, which is very risky, because if you lose the ball, then suddenly the opponent has a 4v4 and then the tables flip. But Slot tends to trust his side to play out of danger in those positions. And that allows you to have more men in attack. And that's where, they want to capitalize and basically hurt you. So I would say getting through the press is one of their main principles now, trying to figure out different iterations. Like I said, their midfield can look like a double pivot. It can also look like a single pivot with two eights, where one of the eights is the second pivot and the other eight is the number 10. Sometimes Diego Jota ends up there from like center forward. And you'll also see like Mohamed Salah drop into the half space as an eight. So there's a lot of moving, chopping, and changing going around, which again, like I said, makes it hard to predict, makes it hard to sort of figure out where the spaces will open up. So that's something to keep an eye on. In settled possession against sides that don't like to press, they tend to go very conventional, JTB 3-5. There's also an interesting 3-3-4 that happens with sometimes Robertson tucking in as the left centre back. Sometimes Trent does the same on the right. And then you basically have like a very wide front four where both the wingers are stretching the pitch. And then you've got a front two, like two false nines, basically trying to pull the centre backs out of position. So that is something that they also rely on to create a gap in the back line. They've, interestingly, I think that the least side with the least offsides. I think they've only been caught offsides single digits, the only side that's in single digits. I think 3 to 5 offsides so far, which is tells you that they're not looking to run in behind directly off the shoulder, but they're trying to create gaps for other people to run into from deeper or from the side. So that's how they function in attack. Um, they're also the strongest team in the air this season. So the aerial numbers are phenomenal. It's like close to 63, 64%. And that's about 20% better than our aerial percentage. So yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting thing, I think, on set pieces, which I think have been a talking point in the Chelsea sphere, saying we hired a set piece expert. Where are the results so far? But yeah, they've only got one goal from corners and set pieces in the league. But should also add that Ibrahima Konate and Virgil van Dijk both have scored headers from corners in the Champions League versus Milan. So you have to be careful. I think that's something that could come back to bite us. And the last thing I probably want to mention, Dan, is that because the style of play looks very similar to what Brighton and even I would say like Maresca does, because you have an inverted right back moving into midfield. So Trent does that, Gusto does that. What you are doing is overloading the center. So the opposition automatically tends to be very centrally heavy. They try to crowd the center, make it difficult to play. And that opens up, spaces on the flank. And that's what Liverpool have been making the money on because Salah and Diaz in those 1v1 situations are absolutely devastating. Diaz is, I would say, a 1v1 monster who's benefiting a lot from this particular formation because he's getting a lot of space to take on backpedaling fullbacks and he's extremely tenacious. He's also relentless, will keep going on even if he loses his 1v1s. His output has been phenomenal this season. He's hit a completely different mark and I think it'll only get better. And obviously, Mo Salah being Mo Salah, he's got 4 goals, 4 assists in 7 games. And I should point out that Jota hasn't had, that much of an impact in terms of goal and assist. Nunez has, I think, 1 goal in 4 games. 14 of 21 um, Liverpool goals and assists have come from Salah and Diaz. So that's where the danger is. It's the wide men. It's them coming inside from the flank. They're both going to try and basically make inroads for Liverpool. You'll also see like the centre forward, Liverpool centre forward isn't really trying to go in behind for crosses or trying to head things in very often. It's all about trying to create those 1v1s for the wide forwards. Like they're the furthest forward. It's not the number 9 like Nicholas Jackson is. Most of the time, the furthest forward attacker is Mohamed Salah or Luis Diaz. So as long as you can keep those two quiet, I think you blunt a significant amount of their threat. And obviously, you have to be very good on defensive set pieces as well. So that's going to be the game plan for me then. Can be done, but again, lots of very very volatile factors that we have to keep a hand on.
And I think a lot of things you mentioned there that would have people, just at least on notice in terms of the fact that we are going up against a side that, is had more stability from at least a personnel perspective than Chelsea have had over the past couple of seasons, outside of the manager, maybe some of the sporting positions in the club. But from a player personnel standpoint, very much a established. You're not names of players that you mentioned are not brand new necessarily to this Liverpool team and this lineup. Where are those areas that you expect Maresca and team to target in terms of the weaknesses that a side that currently sits atop the Premier League table, but does have a loss, so they are not absolutely perfect, might be able to be exploited upon?
Yeah, I think there are certain things you can definitely try and isolate and hope for the best, plan for the worst kind of scenario. So like I mentioned, tactically moving from a single pivot to a double pivot has given you a lot more stability, but the personnel there sort of aren't ideal. I think they also have a problem in terms of midfield balance when they're figuring out of possession stuff. Gravenberg, absolutely sensational on the ball. I would say he's the best Premier League midfielder this season. So I really, really think he's going to be one to watch this game. I saw him midweek and he had an absolute stinker for the Netherlands. So I'm hoping that continues in this one. But just to give you context, McAllister has been triple passed 13 times, which is the second most in the Premier League this season. The problem being that there's another player tied in second for the guy who's been dribbled past the most, and that's Enzo Fernandez. So it's definitely going to be a case of who gets the better of the slower midfielders for each side in midfield. And I'm hoping that with the attacking verve that we have, we're able to exploit McAllister's weaknesses in that regard. I think you can sort of outwit them in terms of balance. There's concentration issues for Gravenberg, in terms of tracking, in terms of being defensively active, at least putting your foot in and getting stuck. So if you can break and get past those two guys, then I think it'll be quite an interesting scenario for us. I've also noticed then that with this additional emphasis on trying to play out, and I want to stress what I mentioned before, where Slot is not exactly trying to give you additional numbers. He's trying to keep numerical parity and trying to sort of make sure there's an extra man in attack. That has sort of caused them a lot of issues. I was watching the Wolves game to analyze this opposition, and there's a lot of times when they tried to play out of pressure by going centrally, and the ball was intercepted by Wolves players. And there were multiple high turnovers. I don't really have the numbers here, but there were I counted like at least 4 or 5 of them where Liverpool lost the ball in their own half trying to play out. And this is a little new to them. And if you are on your toes and if you're able to sort of step up very quickly and get a foot on the ball, then I think you have very good opportunities to get into transition and basically score. So try to exploit Liverpool's build-up. This is a high risk, high reward strategy, especially at Anfield, because they're very good. They're very quick. And something I want to sort of mention, Dan, is a lot of the times teams have thought we're going to press Liverpool, but what happens is the ball goes right to Konate, who usually takes up a right back position. And this allows Trent Alexander-Arnold to push up next to Salah. So there's actually a 2v1 on the right wing for Liverpool. And he directly goes for a long ball in behind. And when Salah and Trent are running in behind, then you've got issues, especially when your left back, your first choice left back, is suspended. So you have to be careful about that. But I think in terms of a weakness, if you can keep strong man marking and make sure that you're marking out all of the new options and having a coordinated press, you can give Liverpool issues 100%. And the third thing that I would point out is obviously I mentioned the defensive numbers are a bit surreal. 2 goals conceded in 7 games so far, and everything looks great in terms of them being the only team in the Premier League that's conceding less than 1 XG per 90 minutes. So from a units perspective, looking good. But Virgil van Dijk and Konate individually, I think, have looked vulnerable when they've been sort of asked to do isolated defensive stuff. Both haven't been as good as they were in previous seasons, and their numbers also sort of reflect a little drop off in terms of success numbers in duels. Slight drop offs, but definitely drop offs. And against Wolves, Konate had this utter brain fart where I don't know what he was doing, where he just waited for the goalkeeper to get the ball after making an interception, and he just let the ball roll. And basically, a Wolves player got ahead of him, crossed the ball, and Ignori finished to give Wolves an equalizer. And Virgil van Dijk essentially got sent off midweek playing for Netherlands against Hungary, where he tried to put in a challenge, a very late challenge out wide, and he looked like half a second slow, trying to defend a ball onto the flanks, and it just looked like he wasn't really good at it. So I think there's a point now where if you can isolate those two guys, then it's definitely going to be interesting. You can get the better of one of these defenders. So Jackson's done it in the past, where the first game of the Poch era, he gave Konate a lot of issues. Van Dijk has also sort of had a couple of issues from a lot of our attackers. So I'm hoping if we can isolate him 1v1, especially with how Liverpool push, we'll be able to get an intro. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, definitely some weaknesses that we can exploit in this one. And I know you mentioned the Alisson versus Kelleher situation. I know that's one that you're not counting as a favor to us, so we'll keep that one in mind too. And then obviously there's the fullbacks are very involved in attack, and so there is an opportunity I think to exploit there as well. Defense maybe being more suspect than you would think. But look, we're going to take our last ad break, and when we get back, it is all about some of the big issues that Enzo Maresca is going to have to solve, particularly when it comes to our fullback and particularly left back situation. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, Sam. So I think two major questions you have here. What's going to happen with the fullbacks, and what's going to happen with some of the load management, particularly for our South American contingent of players who would be coming back into this match? Maybe not just us, but the impact to other teams as well.
Yeah, I think Dan, you sort of gave me the best possible, option there in terms of put Renato Vega there. He's had a great couple of months now. He's been able to play for the senior Portugal team, was man of the match against Ghent. So you're definitely looking at a confident player. But again, do you want to put him 1v1 against Mohamed Salah in a position that is not his first choice? I would ask, why would you do that? It's probably like a little shaky ground, but that's, I think, the most possible option there. The second option is that's available to Maresca is you move Gusto to left back, and what that allows is for Gusto to have at least some flexibility because every time Salah cuts on his stronger foot, then Gusto will be also on a stronger foot and be able to block pretty well defending Salah coming inside. So I think that's another option available to Maresca. The third option is, I think, very left field, and there's a highly improbable chance that it happens. But and I think one Chelsea player is in particular not going to be very happy about it, but it's going to be Levi Colwill at left back against Mo Salah. Then you've got Tosin and Disasi at centre back, and you've got Gusto at right back. But Colwill has played left back for England. He's sort of subtly said he did not enjoy playing that position, but if asked to step in and essentially do a job where he's in the form that he is defending 1v1 against Mo Salah, I think he would do it, and I think he would do a very, very good job. The problem is that you would lose a lot of the progressive passing that he brings. So I don't
Sure.
think it's going to happen. Highly improbable, but I'll probably go with the same option. Say that it's going to be Vega at left back, and I wish him all the best, and I hope that he can do a job on Salah.
And then the other big question as we kind of look to close was just around the Enzo and Caicedo situation in terms of and also on the flip side for Liverpool, McAllister and Darwin Nunez, just potentially around availability being South American and getting back up into the UK at times does tend to put them in a disadvantage from the recovery situation. Enzo looked a little bit better in that last match again for Argentina, which I think would excite some people. I mean, Caicedo's been so important in the midfield. It does feel like Caicedo is a drop in, and then the question becomes: is Lavia comfortable to start, or is it potentially a planned change at that like 60-minute mark to involve in? But what are your thoughts on that being a solution for Maresca?
Yeah, I think it definitely happens, to be honest. So I did watch both his games. And he interestingly played as the defensive midfield in both those games as like the deepest pivot who was dropping into the centre back situations and helping out. But he played 85 in the first and the full 19 in the second. So he's definitely going to have a lot of load in his legs. And again, the best case scenario, Dan, like you said, is you hope that Lavia's had a very good run at Cobham, and he's essentially come to a point where he can play 30 minutes at least. So play Enzo for that duration, and then bring Lavia in, and then you can switch up. But Caicedo, it's the same eternal question. Like it just feels like we're in a situation that we might run him into the ground because we generally don't have replacement, especially in a situation like this where you would want Vega maybe coming in and holding that position. But if he's playing at left back, then you have no alternative but to play Moises for 90 minutes, especially when you've got such a brutal run of fixtures. You want to be able to manage them well and essentially keep them fresher for, I would say, like other fixtures which you could win. So that's definitely going to be a big headache for Maresca. But I hope that there's 60 minutes for Enzo, and if he has a very good first game of the season sort of repeat performance, then I hope he can play 90. But fatigue levels, if the performances go up and down, I hope people keep in mind that they've played extensively for their nations and come back, and it's definitely not going to be easy for either of them.
Well, definitely plenty to keep in mind. Definitely plenty to play for this Chelsea team against Liverpool this weekend. We hope that we claim maximum points, but at least taking a point in general would be, I think, a little bit, depending upon how the game goes, of a moral victory for Mariska and his men. But that's going to do it for this episode. So we will see you live on YouTube after full time, hopefully celebrating and in a very, very positive mood, talking about how Chelsea got something across the line versus Liverpool. But that's going to do it for this episode. So thank you so much to you, the listener. Thank you so much to Sam for prepping for this one. And until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.